When Claire Morrison returns to her childhood trailer to settle her mother's estate, she discovers a metal box containing 43 letters her mother never sent, letters addressed to the Ashford family, one of Connecticut's wealthiest dynasties. Each letter begs for recognition, for help, for a child's rightful place. What Claire uncovers in those pages doesn't just explain her mother's lifetime of silence. It reveals a sacrifice so profound, it rewrites everything she thought she knew about love, dignity, and the true cost of protecting those we cherish most. Claire Morrison's hand as she stood outside the rusted trailer that had been home for the first 18 years of her life. Ridgefield, Connecticut had a way of hiding its poor, tucking mobile home parks behind tree lines where the wealthy wouldn't have to see them on their way to tennis clubs and farmers' markets. The November wind carried the scent of wood smoke and wet leaves, sounds of distant traffic humming like a half-forgotten lullaby. Claire had been back in town for 3 days now, staying at a motel off Route 7 because she couldn't bring herself to sleep in the trailer where her mother had died. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late, gone too fast. Margaret Morrison had spent her final weeks in County General, holding Claire's hand and saying very little. That silence, Claire realized now, had defined her mother's entire life. The door stuck the way it always had. Claire had to lift and push simultaneously, a trick she'd learned at age 6. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered. Cramped, clean, painfully sparse. Her mother had worked as a seamstress for 42 years, taking in alterations and mending at a dry cleaner's on Main Street. The sewing machine still sat in the corner, an ancient singer that clicked and whirred like it was speaking its own language. Spools of thread lined the windowsill in a rainbow Claire used to rearrange by color when she was small, back when making patterns from chaos felt like magic. The trailer smelled of lavender sachets and old fabric, underlaid with something else, the particular scent of a life lived carefully, quietly, without excess. Claire moved through the narrow space, running her fingers along surfaces that held the ghost of her mother's touch. The Formica countertop with its cigarette burn from before Claire was born, back when Margaret still had friends who visited. The bookshelf made from milk crates and plywood, holding library books Margaret checked out religiously every 2 weeks. Always biographies, always about women who'd done extraordinary things with ordinary lives. Claire had 3 specific mannerisms inherited directly from her mother. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when thinking, the habit of folding paper into smaller and smaller squares when anxious, and the tendency to hum tunelessly while working with her hands. Right now, standing in the center of the trailer, she was doing all 3, hair tucked, humming, fingers creasing and recreasing the property assessment notice the county had sent. She'd taken the week off from her job at the Hartford Children's Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. 29 years old, $30,000 in student debt, living in a studio apartment that cost more than it should. She'd worked her way through state college on scholarships and overnight shifts, determined to build something her mother never had: security, options, a life that wasn't dictated by the next paycheck. Margaret had been so proud at Claire's graduation, sitting alone in a sea of families, her hands raw from a week of wedding dress alterations. The estate, such as it was, consisted of this trailer, a 12-year-old Toyota with transmission problems, and approximately $800 in a savings account. The lawyer had been apologetic when he laid it out. Claire assured him it was fine. She'd expected nothing different. Her mother had lived without margin, without buffer, converting every spare dollar into Claire's future. What Claire hadn't expected was the locked metal box she found tucked beneath the bathroom sink, behind bottles of bargain shampoo and generic aspirin. It was a fireproof document safe, the kind you could buy at an office supply store, dark grey, about the size of a thick dictionary with a combination lock. Claire sat on the bathroom floor, turned the box over in her hands, and felt the weight of it. Not heavy, but substantial. Something inside shifted when she tilted it. Her mother had never locked anything. There'd been nothing worth locking away. They'd lived in a trailer park where everyone knew everyone else's business, where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. What could Margaret Morrison possibly have needed to keep secure? Claire tried her mother's birthday. Nothing. Her own birthday? Nothing. The date Margaret had started working at the dry cleaners, Claire knew it from the little anniversary cards her boss had sent each year. Nothing. Then, almost without thinking, she tried a date that had always seemed to matter for reasons Claire never understood. August 14th, 1978. The lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, were letters. Dozens of them. Maybe more. They were bundled with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age, organized by year according to the postmarks Claire could see on the envelopes. But these weren't letters that had been received and saved. These were letters that had been written, addressed, stamped, and never sent. Claire lifted the first bundle carefully. The paper was good quality, creamy stationery that would have cost money Margaret never spent on herself. Each envelope was addressed in her mother's careful handwriting to the same place. The Ashford Estate, Willow Creek Road, Ridgefield, Connecticut. The Ashford Estate. Claire knew it the way everyone in Ridgefield knew it. A vast property on the wealthy north side of town, hidden behind stone walls and old-growth maples. The Ashford family had made their fortune in manufacturing 3 generations back, then diversified into real estate and technology. They funded the library, the hospital wing, half the scholarships at the local schools. Their name was on buildings. Thomas Ashford had died years ago, but his widow still lived on the estate. Claire had seen her once at a charity event the hospital hosted, an elegant woman in her 80s, moving through the crowd like royalty. Why would Margaret Morrison, a seamstress from the mobile home park, be writing letters to the Ashford family? Claire's hands trembled as she opened the first envelope, dated September 1978. The letter inside was written on matching stationery, the handwriting young but already showing the careful precision Margaret would carry her whole life. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, I am writing to inform you that your son Thomas is the father of my daughter, born August 14th, 1978. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking that you acknowledge her existence, that you allow her to know her father, that you give her the family she deserves. Her name is Claire Elizabeth. She has your son's eyes. The world tilted sideways. Claire read the letter again. Then again. The words didn't change. The date didn't change. August 14th, 1978. Her birthday. Thomas Ashford. Not Thomas Ashford, the elderly patriarch who died years ago. His son, Thomas Ashford Jr., who would have been in his 20s in 1978, who'd gone on to marry Dorothy Pemberton in a wedding that made the society pages in 1981, who'd had 2 children, legitimate children, before dying in a sailing accident in 2003, Claire's father. She grabbed the next letter, hands shaking so badly she almost tore the envelope. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, I have not received a response to my previous letter. I understand this is difficult news, but Claire is thriving. She is 6 months old now, healthy and beautiful. I have enclosed a photograph. I hope you can see your son in her face. I am still not asking for financial support. I only want her to know where she comes from. Please respond. Another letter, dated 6 months later. Dear Mrs. Ashford, I know Thomas has married. I saw the announcement in the paper. I wish him happiness. But this does not change the fact that Claire is his daughter. She is walking now, saying her first words. She deserves to know her siblings when they come. She deserves to be part of her family. I am begging you to acknowledge her. The letters continued year after year. Claire read them on the bathroom floor as the afternoon light faded, as the temperature in the unheated trailer dropped, as her entire understanding of her life crumbled and reformed into something completely different. Margaret had written 43 letters over the course of 26 years. The last one was dated 2004, a year after Thomas Jr.'s death. Dear Mrs. Ashford, I am writing one final time. Thomas is gone now, and with him any hope that Claire might have known her father. But you are still alive. You have grandchildren. Claire among them, whether you acknowledge it or not. She has graduated high school with honors. She is attending college on scholarship to become a nurse. She is everything a grandmother could be proud of. This is my last letter. If you choose not to respond, I will honor that silence. But know that I raised a remarkable woman, and she carries your family's blood in her veins. None of the letters had been sent. Every single one sat in this box, unsent, unread by their intended recipients. Margaret had poured her heart onto paper for 26 years and never once dropped an envelope in the mail. Claire's mind raced through her childhood, reframing every memory through this new lens. Her mother's refusal to talk about Claire's father, not evasion, but a kind of protective silence. The way Margaret watched wealthy families in town with an expression Claire had read as envy, but now understood as something more complicated. The fact that Margaret had insisted Claire apply to every scholarship, every grant, every opportunity that might lift her into a different life. Margaret had raised her poor deliberately, had kept her away from the Ashford name, the Ashford money, the Ashford world. But why? If Thomas Ashford was Claire's father, if the Ashford family had the wealth and resources to change their lives completely, why had Margaret chosen silence over support? Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her best friend Rachel asking how the estate cleanup was going, if she needed company, if she was okay. Claire stared at the message and couldn't begin to formulate a response. How could she explain that she'd just discovered her entire identity was built on a foundation of secrets? She looked around the cramped bathroom, at the cheap fixtures and water-stained ceiling, at the life her mother had built from nothing and maintained with exhausting consistency. Every choice made sense now in a horrible new way. Every sacrifice, every extra shift, every time Margaret had said they were fine when they clearly weren't, all of it in service of keeping Claire separate from a family that might not have wanted her. But there was something else in the box, beneath the letters. Claire reached in and pulled out a smaller envelope, unsealed, containing a photograph. It showed a young woman, Margaret, probably 19 or 20, beautiful in a way Claire had never seen in the tired, work-worn mother she'd known. She was standing beside a young man with dark hair and an easy smile, their arms around each other, clearly in love. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, Thomas and me, summer 1977, before everything changed. Claire studied her father's face. She did have his eyes, the same dark blue, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners, the same broad forehead, the same shape to the mouth, a wealthy man's daughter raised in a trailer park. A family fortune that might have been hers, spent instead on someone else's children. A father who'd married someone appropriate, someone from his world, while her mother sewed other women's wedding dresses in a back room. The anger came then, sudden and overwhelming. Anger at her mother for never fighting, never demanding, never insisting that Claire receive what was rightfully hers. Anger at a father she'd never known, who'd apparently abandoned a pregnant girlfriend to marry someone suitable. Anger at an entire family who might not even know she existed. But beneath the anger was something else, a terrible, aching question. If her mother had written these letters but never sent them, what had stopped her? What had Margaret known or feared or been told that had kept her silent for 42 years? Claire pulled out her phone and searched for Ashford Family, Ridgefield, Connecticut. The results came immediately. News articles, society page mentions, charity event coverage. She found an obituary for Thomas Ashford Jr. from 2003, survived by his wife Dorothy and children Christopher and Elizabeth. No mention of another daughter. She found more recent articles about Christopher Ashford, now in his 40s running the family's technology ventures, about Elizabeth Ashford Chen, married to a venture capitalist, sitting on the boards of 3 non-profits, about Dorothy Ashford, the widow, still living on the estate, still hosting the annual Christmas charity gala that was a fixture of Ridgefield society, Claire's half-siblings, her stepmother, her grandmother. People who lived 20 minutes away but might as well have existed on another planet. The sun had set completely now. The trailer was dark except for the glow of Claire's phone. She sat on the bathroom floor surrounded by letters her mother had written and never sent, and she understood with sudden clarity what she had to do. If you're watching this and you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to take a turn none of us saw coming, because Claire was about to learn that some silences protect us, and some silences destroy us. The truth was waiting at the Ashford estate, and it was so much bigger than she could have imagined. Claire spent 3 days reading and rereading the letters, trying to piece together a story from fragments and implications. Margaret had been a music teacher when she met Thomas. That detail appeared in one of the early letters. She'd taught piano to children, worked at a music store on weekends, dreamed of opening her own studio someday. Thomas had come in looking for a guitar, and they'd started talking about jazz, about the music that shaped them. The early letters referenced places they'd gone together, concerts in Hartford, walks along the river, dinners at a diner that still existed on the south end of town. Margaret wrote about falling in love with his laugh, the way he listened when she played piano, how he made her feel seen in a way no one else had. She wrote about his dreams of breaking free from family expectations, of building something of his own that wasn't tied to the Ashford name. Then came summer 1977. Margaret got pregnant. The letters from that period were heartbreaking in their hope and naivety. She wrote about telling Thomas, about his initial panic followed by promises that they'd figure it out together. She wrote about the apartment they'd looked at, the names they'd discussed, the future they'd planned, and then silence in the letters for 3 months. When Margaret's writing resumed in December 1977, everything had changed. Thomas had stopped returning calls. His family had gotten involved. There were lawyers mentioned. Then legal terms Claire had to look up. Paternity agreements, non-disclosure clauses, financial settlements. One letter from January 1978 made Claire's blood run cold. "Dear Thomas, your mother came to see me today. She offered me money, a substantial amount, to leave town and never contact your family again. She said you were engaged to Dorothy Pemberton, that the wedding was being planned, that my presence would complicate things. She said I could give our baby a comfortable life if I took the settlement, and disappeared. When I refused, she said something I cannot forget. If you truly love my son, you will let him have the life he was meant for. You will not trap him with obligations that will destroy his future. I wonder if she knows that loving someone sometimes means fighting for them, not releasing them. I told her I wanted nothing but acknowledgement. She told me acknowledgement was the one thing she could never give." Claire read that passage 5 times, and each time she felt the trap close a little tighter around her mother's younger self. A working-class girl pregnant by a wealthy man's son, a family with resources and lawyers, a society that would judge Margaret harshly for the same behavior it would excuse in Thomas. But Margaret hadn't taken the money. The letters made that clear. She'd refused the settlement, refused to leave town, refused to pretend Claire didn't exist. She'd kept her job at the music store through her pregnancy, moved into this trailer when she could no longer afford her apartment, taught herself to sew when the music store let her go for being unmarried and pregnant. The letters from 1978 through the mid-80s were pleas for recognition. Margaret never asked for money, never threatened legal action, never demanded anything except acknowledgement. She sent photographs, baby pictures, toddler milestones, elementary school achievements. She documented Claire's life in careful detail, offering the Ashford family a chance to know their granddaughter, their niece, their half-sister. And according to these letters, they never responded. Not once. Except, and this was what kept Claire awake those 3 nights, the letters were never sent. So how could the Ashfords have responded to letters they never received? Something had happened between Margaret writing these letters and actually mailing them. Something that had convinced her that silence was the better option, that keeping Claire separate from the Ashford family was the right choice. Claire needed to understand what that something was. She drove past the Ashford estate twice before getting the courage to turn into the long driveway. The property was exactly as imposing as she'd imagined. A stone mansion that belonged in a different era, surrounded by grounds that stretched toward tree lines in every direction. She'd called ahead, requesting a meeting with Dorothy Ashford, using her credentials as a nurse and inventing a story about a charity initiative the hospital was planning. The housekeeper who answered the door looked at Claire with polite disinterest, led her to a sitting room filled with antiques and oil paintings, and informed her that Mrs. Ashford would be with her shortly. Claire waited, her mother's photograph in her purse, 43 unsent letters in a box in her car, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dorothy Ashford entered the room like someone accustomed to deference. She was in her mid-80s now, elegant in cashmere and pearls, her white hair styled perfectly. She moved slowly but with dignity, and when she sat across from Claire, her blue eyes, the same shade as Claire's, the same shade as Thomas Jr.'s in the photograph, assessed with sharp intelligence. "Miss Morrison," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the cultivated accent of old Connecticut money. "My assistant said you wanted to discuss a hospital charity initiative, though I must confess we already support County General quite generously." Claire had rehearsed this moment a dozen different ways. In some versions she'd been diplomatic, in others direct. In her angriest fantasies, she'd simply laid the letters on the coffee table and watched Dorothy's composure crack. What came out instead was the truth, simple and devastating. "My mother was Margaret Morrison. She died 3 weeks ago. Before she died, she left me a box of letters she'd written to your family. Letters about me, about your son Thomas being my father." The silence that followed was so complete, Claire could hear the antique clock on the mantel ticking, counting off seconds like a heartbeat. Dorothy's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "I see," Dorothy said finally. "And what is it you want, Miss Morrison? Money, recognition, some kind of settlement?" The question landed like a slap. Claire felt the anger rise hot and bright. "I want to understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to know why my mother raised me in a trailer park when I had a family with resources. I want to know why she wrote 43 letters and never sent a single one. I want to know what you said to her that made her choose poverty over asking you for help." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, studying Claire with an expression that might have been regret or might have been simple wariness. "Your mother never sent those letters?" Dorothy asked. "Never." "Then she was wiser than I gave her credit for." Dorothy stood and moved to the window overlooking the gardens, her back to Claire. The posture was dismissive, but Claire caught something in the set of the older woman's shoulders, a tension that suggested this conversation wasn't as easy as Dorothy wanted it to appear. "Thomas was 23 when he met your mother," Dorothy said, still facing the window. "Brilliant, charming, completely directionless. He was supposed to join the family business, but he had romantic notions about making his own way. He worked at a bookstore, played guitar in coffee houses, dated entirely inappropriate women." Claire bit back a response. "Let Dorothy talk. Let her reveal herself." "Margaret was one of several such women," Dorothy continued. "Pretty, talented, but not from our world. Thomas went through phases, the artist phase, the activist phase, the musician phase. We'd learned to wait them out. He always came back to reality eventually." "I'm not a phase," Claire said quietly. "I'm a person." Dorothy turned, and for the first time Claire saw something like emotion cross her face. "No, you're not. You're the consequence of a phase. There's a difference." The cruelty of it took Claire's breath away. She thought of her mother, young and pregnant and in love, facing this woman's cold assessment of her worth. "When Margaret told Thomas she was pregnant," Dorothy continued, sitting back down, "he panicked. He came to us. We handled it the way families like ours handle such situations. We offered a settlement, generous enough to set her up comfortably somewhere else, somewhere Thomas wouldn't have to be reminded of his mistake." "I'm not a mistake. I didn't say you were. I said you were a consequence, and consequences can be managed." Margaret, to her credit, refused the money. She also refused to leave town, refused to stay quiet, refused to make this easy for anyone. So we took a different approach. Dorothy reached for a leather portfolio on the side table, opened it, and removed a document. She handed it to Claire. It was a paternity test, dated March 1979, when Claire would have been 7 months old. The test confirmed Thomas Ashford Jr. as the father. Claire's hands trembled as she read it. "We knew," Dorothy said simply. "From the beginning, we knew you were Thomas's child. That was never in question." "Then why?" "Because Thomas didn't want to know you." The words hung in the air like poison. Dorothy delivered them without inflection, without softness, a simple statement of fact that destroyed every assumption Claire had built. "He was engaged to Dorothy Pemberton by then," the older woman continued, "building the life he was supposed to have. He made his choice. He chose his future with Dorothy, his position in the family business, his legitimate children. He chose the life he was meant for over the complication you represented." Claire felt something break inside her chest. All those letters her mother had written, begging for acknowledgement, for connection, for a chance. And Thomas had known about her, had the paternity test, had proof she was his daughter, and had chosen to pretend she didn't exist. "My mother didn't know this," Claire said. "She kept writing letters asking you to tell him, asking for him to know me. She thought you were keeping us apart." "We were," Dorothy said, "at his request. Thomas asked us to handle it, to keep Margaret at a distance, to ensure you never became part of his life. We did what our son asked us to do. So you let my mother believe there was hope. You let her write letters, thinking maybe one day he'd read them and care. We let her believe whatever she needed to believe. The alternative would have been crueler, telling her that her child's father wanted nothing to do with either of them. Sometimes, Miss Morrison, a kind lie is more merciful than an ugly truth." Claire thought of her mother, working brutal hours at the dry cleaners, coming home with fingers pricked from needles and eyes strained from close work. Thought of the scholarships Margaret had pushed her to apply for, the opportunities she'd insisted Claire pursue, the life she'd built from nothing because she'd been too proud or too protective to accept charity from people who despised her. "Did she know?" Claire asked. "Did my mother eventually find out that he didn't want me?" Dorothy's expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing her features. She came to see me. October 1984. You would have been 6 years old. She'd seen an announcement about Thomas and Dorothy's son Christopher being born. She showed up at this house with another letter, demanding I give it to Thomas personally. I told her the truth, all of it. That Thomas knew about you, that he'd been tested, that he'd made his choice, that no amount of letters would change his mind. Claire's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. October 1984. She calculated back through the letters. That was when they stopped being pleas and became something else. Documentations of a life, reports to a family that would never read them. What did she say? Claire whispered. She asked me one question. Does he ever ask about her? Does he ever wonder? I told her no, and then I offered her the settlement again. Twice what we'd originally proposed. Enough to move somewhere nice, give you a better life, start over somewhere Thomas would never have to think about you. And she refused. She refused. She said, Dorothy paused, and for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. She said that she would rather raise you poor and proud than comfortable and complicit in erasing your existence. She said you deserved to know the truth about your father someday, and she wouldn't take money that required her silence. The pieces were falling into place now. Margaret had learned the truth in 1984, had understood that Thomas didn't want them, that the Ashford family was never going to acknowledge Claire, that all her hopes for connection were built on a foundation of lies, and she'd chosen to keep writing letters anyway. Not to send them, she'd known by then they'd never be read, but to create a record, to document Claire's life for reasons Claire was only beginning to understand. The letters after 1984, Claire said slowly, they're different. She's not asking for anything anymore. She's just telling you about me, about who I'm becoming. I wouldn't know, Dorothy said. As you said, she never sent them. But she wanted me to find them, Claire realized. She wanted me to know the truth, that you all knew about me, that my father chose not to know me, that she'd tried. Dorothy stood again, signaling the end of the conversation. Miss Morrison, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told your mother. There is nothing for you here. No family waiting to welcome you, no inheritance to claim, no happy reunion. Thomas is dead. He died without ever expressing regret or curiosity about the daughter he refused to acknowledge. His legitimate children have their own lives and would not welcome the disruption of a half-sister appearing. If you're hoping for some kind of reconciliation or recognition, you're going to be disappointed. Claire stood as well, meeting Dorothy's gaze with a steadiness she didn't feel. I'm not hoping for anything from you, she said. I came here to understand why my mother made the choices she made, why she raised me the way she did, and now I do. She walked toward the door, then turned back. My mother was worth 10 of your son. She worked herself to exhaustion, to give me opportunities he could have provided without effort, and chose not to. She loved me enough to let me believe my father was simply absent, rather than actively rejecting me. She protected me from a truth that would have broken something in me as a child, and she was a better parent alone than he ever would have been with all your family's resources. Dorothy's expression was unreadable. Perhaps, she said quietly, but she still died in a trailer park and he died on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Good intentions don't change outcomes, Miss Morrison. Claire made it to her car before the tears came, hot and angry and unstoppable. She sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and let herself break apart in a way she'd never allowed while her mother was alive. Margaret had known, had lived with the knowledge that Claire's father didn't want her, that there was a family out there with resources and connections who'd chosen to pretend she didn't exist, and Margaret had never told her, had never burdened her child with that particular pain. Claire drove aimlessly for hours, through Ridgefield's wealthy neighborhoods and poorer sections, past the dry cleaners where her mother had worked, past the library where they'd spent Saturday afternoons when Claire was small. She ended up at the small cemetery where Margaret was buried, a modest plot in the section reserved for people without much money. The grave was still fresh, the earth dark and unsettled. Claire sat beside it and pulled out the letters, reading them again with new understanding. These weren't pleas that had gone unanswered. They were a mother's testimony, a record of love and sacrifice that Margaret had known would someday reach the daughter who needed to see it. Dear Mrs. Ashford, Claire won first place in the science fair today. She built a model of the solar system from recycled materials because we couldn't afford the kits the other children used. Her teacher said it showed more creativity than any project she'd seen in 20 years. I wanted you to know that your granddaughter is brilliant, resourceful, capable of turning limitations into advantages. I wanted you to know what you're missing. Letter after letter, year after year. Claire's accomplishments, her struggles, her growth, all documented with a mother's fierce pride and a quiet, devastating accusation. Look what you refused. See what you lost. But there was something else too, something Claire hadn't caught the first time through. References that didn't quite make sense, details that seemed out of place. In a letter from 1992, Margaret mentioned the medical expenses you covered without her knowing. In one from 1997, she thanked someone for the scholarship that appeared at exactly the right moment. Claire read more carefully, and a pattern emerged. Anonymous help that had appeared throughout her childhood. The time she'd gotten pneumonia at age 8, and the hospital bill had been mysteriously paid. The scholarship she'd received for music camp when she was 12, a scholarship she'd never applied for. The grant that covered her college application fees when they couldn't afford them. Someone had been helping them. Quietly, anonymously, without acknowledgement or expectation of gratitude. Claire pulled out her phone and called the one person who might have answers, Dorothy Ashford's personal assistant, whose number she'd gotten from the hospital's donor relations department. This is Claire Morrison. I met with Mrs. Ashford this afternoon. I need to know, did she ever provide financial assistance to my mother? Anonymously. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm not authorized to discuss Mrs. Ashford's private financial matters. Please, my mother is dead. I just need to understand. Another pause. Then quietly, Mrs. Ashford has supported many families in Ridgefield over the years. Anonymous scholarships, medical bill assistance, things of that nature. If your mother was a recipient, there would be no record connecting it to the Ashford name. That was always the condition. Complete anonymity. Claire felt the world tilt again. Why would she help us if she didn't want to acknowledge us? You'd have to ask Mrs. Ashford that question. But Claire was already calling Dorothy's number, the one on the business card the housekeeper had given her on the way out. Dorothy answered on the third ring, her voice carrying a note of resignation, as if she'd been expecting this call. You helped us, Claire said without preamble. All those years, the medical bills, the scholarships, the grants. That was you. It was the least I could do. The least you could do would have been to acknowledge I existed. Why help anonymously? Why not just... Because Thomas forbade it, Dorothy interrupted, and for the first time Claire heard actual emotion in her voice. He made me promise when he agreed to marry Dorothy Pemberton, when he agreed to join the family business and be the son we needed him to be. He made me promise that you and your mother would never be part of our public lives, that there would be no acknowledgement, no contact, no connection that could threaten the family he was building. So you paid us off in secret. I kept you from drowning, Dorothy snapped. Your mother was working herself to death trying to provide for you on a seamstress's salary. I saw the numbers, her income, her expenses, the gap between them. She was one medical emergency away from homelessness. So yes, I helped, anonymously as promised, ensuring you had opportunities, that your mother had breathing room, that you could build a life without being crushed by circumstances you didn't choose. Claire's hands were shaking. Did my mother know? I don't know. She never acknowledged it, never thanked me, never once indicated she knew where the help was coming from. But Margaret was intelligent. I suspect she understood. Then why did she keep writing these letters? If she knew you were helping, if she knew Thomas didn't want us, why document everything? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You'd have to ask your mother that, Dorothy said finally. Though I imagine it was for the same reason I kept copies of every anonymous scholarship, every paid medical bill, every grant I arranged, because we both knew that someday you'd ask questions, and we both wanted you to have answers when you did. Claire looked down at the letters scattered on her mother's grave, at the testament of love and loss and stubborn dignity they represented. There's something else, isn't there? Claire said. Something you haven't told me. Another silence. Then, come back to the estate tomorrow. There's someone you need to meet. The line went dead. Claire sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by unsent letters and unanswered questions, and felt the first revelation settle into her bones. Her mother had known, Dorothy had helped, and Thomas, her father, had been the obstacle between them, the one who demanded silence and gotten it, even from beyond the grave. But Dorothy had said there was someone Claire needed to meet, someone who held another piece of this story. The truth was bigger than she'd imagined, and she was about to discover just how much bigger. Claire returned to the Ashford estate the next morning, exhaustion written into every line of her body. She'd spent the night in the trailer, reading and rereading the letters, trying to piece together a complete picture from the fragments her mother had left behind. The housekeeper led her not to the sitting room from yesterday, but to a sunroom at the back of the house, all windows and light and plants. Dorothy was there, but she wasn't alone. A man in his 40s sat across from her, handsome in a weathered way, with dark hair going grey at the temples, and those same distinctive blue eyes Claire saw in her own mirror every morning. He stood when Claire entered, and the shock of recognition was mutual and immediate. "Claire," Dorothy said, "this is Christopher Ashford, your half-brother." Christopher extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and let it drop to his side. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice carried genuine anguish. "I swear to God, I didn't know about you until yesterday when my grandmother called me. 29 years, and I didn't know I had a sister." Claire looked between Christopher and Dorothy, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "You told him. After I left yesterday, you told him." "I told both of my grandchildren," Dorothy said, "Christopher and Elizabeth. They deserved to know the truth." "And what did they say?" Claire asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Were they thrilled to discover they have a poor relation? A half-sister their father abandoned?" Christopher flinched. "I said I was furious. I said I was ashamed. I said our father was a coward and a hypocrite who preached about family values while denying his own child." The raw anger in his voice surprised Claire. She'd expected defensiveness, denial, the same cold dismissal Dorothy had given her. Instead, Christopher looked as shattered as she felt. "I have questions," he said. "So many questions. But first, I need to show you something." He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. It showed a letter, old, worn, but carefully preserved in a clear protective sleeve. "This was in my father's desk," Christopher said. "I found it when we were cleaning out his study after he died. I never understood what it meant until yesterday." He handed Claire the phone and she read the letter on the screen. It was written in Thomas Ashford Jr.'s handwriting, undated, but the paper looked aged. "To whoever finds this, I need to confess something I've carried for 24 years. In 1978, I got a woman pregnant, Margaret Morrison. She was kind, talented, everything I thought I wanted before I understood what my family needed from me. When she told me about the baby, I panicked. I let my mother handle it. I married Dorothy Pemberton and built the life I was supposed to have. I have 2 beautiful children who bear my name and will inherit everything I build. But I have another daughter, Claire Elizabeth Morrison. I have never met her, never held her, never been her father in any way that matters. This is my greatest shame. This is the secret I will die carrying. If you are reading this, I am gone. Find her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her she deserved better than the coward who fathered her." Claire's vision blurred. She read the letter 3 times, and each time the pain cut deeper. Her father had been sorry, had carried guilt, had wanted her to know, after he was dead, and it was too late to matter. "Why didn't you find me?" Claire asked Christopher, her voice breaking. "You found this in 2003. It's been 22 years. Why didn't you look for me?" Christopher's face crumpled. "Because I was a coward too. I read that letter and I couldn't handle it. I was grieving my father, trying to hold together his business, dealing with my own failing marriage. I told myself I'd find you when things settled down. But things never settled down, and days became weeks, became years, and the longer I waited, the harder it became to justify why I'd waited in the first place." He sat down heavily, head in his hands. "I convinced myself you were better off not knowing, that reaching out would only hurt you, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. I didn't want to face what finding you would mean, that my father had lived a lie, that my family had built our lives on the exclusion of an innocent child, that I'd benefited from resources that should have been shared with you." Dorothy spoke then, her voice softer than Claire had heard it. "When you came here yesterday, I told Christopher everything, not just about you, but about his father's demands, about the promises I'd made, about the help I'd given secretly over the years. I told him because he deserved to know what kind of man his father really was, and I told him because you deserve to have at least one member of this family stand up and admit we failed you." Claire looked at the letter on Christopher's phone again, at her father's confession written in ink that had faded but not disappeared. He was sorry, she said flatly, but he was only sorry enough to write a letter he hid in a desk, not sorry enough to actually change anything while he was alive. Yes, Dorothy agreed. That's exactly right. My son was weak. He cared more about appearances and expectations than about doing the right thing, and I enabled him. I kept his secret, honored his wishes, made sure you and your mother stayed hidden while the legitimate family thrived. She stood and walked to the window, her back to both of them. But your mother was stronger than all of us. She knew the truth, lived with the rejection, and still raised you to be remarkable. She worked herself into an early grave so you could have opportunities. She never told you how badly you'd been rejected, because she wanted you to grow up without that wound. She was better than this entire family put together. Claire felt something crack open in her chest. Anger, grief, and a strange kind of vindication all mixed together. Her mother had been right, had made the right choice, had protected Claire in the only way that mattered. "To the letters," Claire said suddenly, looking at Dorothy. "My mother wrote 43 letters and never sent them, but she kept them. She made sure I'd find them. Why?" Dorothy turned, and for the first time, Claire saw actual tears in the old woman's eyes. "Because she wanted you to know you were never unwanted by her, that every moment of your life mattered to someone, that you had a witness to your existence, even when your father's family refused to look." The second revelation crashed over Claire like a wave. The letters weren't pleas. They were testimony, they were proof. They were Margaret's way of ensuring that no matter what happened, no matter what the Ashford family claimed, there would be a record of Claire's life, Claire's worth, Claire's existence in the world. "She was creating evidence," Claire whispered. "Not for you, for me." "Yes," Dorothy said. "She was making sure you'd know someday that you mattered, that you were seen, documented, cherished, even if the rest of us refused to acknowledge you." Christopher was crying now, openly and without shame. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't change anything. I know sorry is worthless when it comes 22 years too late, but I need you to hear it anyway. You should have grown up in this house. You should have known your father, had siblings, had the resources this family could have provided. Instead, you were erased, and I benefited from that erasure. That's going to haunt me for the rest of my life." Claire looked at her half-brother, at this man who shared her eyes and her father, and apparently her capacity for regret. She felt the anger that had sustained her since finding the letters begin to transform into something more complex. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "I need to show you both something," Claire said. She pulled out the photograph of her mother and Thomas, young and in love, taken before everything went wrong. "This is who they were before your family destroyed it," she told Dorothy. "Before the lies and the money and the demands for silence, they loved each other. And you took that away from both of them." Dorothy studied the photograph, and something in her expression shifted. Memory, perhaps, or recognition of a different version of her son. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for 46 years, and I made my choice. I chose my son's future over his happiness. I chose the family name over his conscience. And he chose to let me make those choices for him, because it was easier than being brave." She looked up at Claire with an expression that might have been pleading. "But you don't have to make the same choices. You have a brother who wants to know you, a sister who's waiting to meet you, a family that can't undo the past, but might be able to build a different future." Claire felt the weight of the moment settling around her. This was the choice her mother had never gotten to make, whether to accept the Ashford family on their terms, to let them be part of her life after all they'd done. But Claire had something her mother never had: the letters. The proof of Margaret's love, Margaret's strength, Margaret's refusal to be diminished by other people's cruelty. And she had the knowledge that she'd been raised by someone extraordinary, someone who'd chosen dignity over comfort, who'd chosen truth over money, who'd chosen her daughter over everything else. "I need time," Claire said. "I need to process all of this, and I need to decide if I want any of you in my life." Christopher nodded. "That's fair, more than fair. Take all the time you need. But please, when you're ready, let me try to be the brother I should have been looking for all these years." Claire spent the next 2 weeks in a state of suspension, finishing the process of settling her mother's estate, while her mind churned through everything she'd learned. She boxed up the trailer's contents, donated most of it, kept a few precious items, the Singer sewing machine, the collection of biographies, a photo album she'd never noticed before that contained pictures of Margaret young and beautiful and full of hope. Christopher called twice, leaving careful voicemails that didn't push, that simply offered connection if and when she wanted it. Elizabeth sent a letter, actual handwritten letter, that Claire read and reread, looking for false notes and finding only genuine regret and a tentative offer of sisterhood. But it was Dorothy who surprised her. A package arrived at Claire's apartment in Hartford, hand-delivered by the Ashford Estate's driver. Inside was a leather-bound book, clearly old, clearly valuable. A note on Ashford Estate stationery was tucked inside. This belonged to your grandmother, my mother-in-law, Eleanor Ashford. She kept a journal of her thoughts on family, legacy, and what we owe to those we bring into the world. I thought you should have it. You have more of Eleanor in you than any of my biological grandchildren. She would have been proud to know you. Dorothy. Claire opened the journal carefully. Eleanor Ashford had died before Claire was born, but her words were alive on the page, thoughtful, questioning, occasionally critical of the family she'd married into. One entry, dated 1962, made Claire catch her breath. My son is getting married tomorrow to a woman his family approves of, and I can see in his eyes that he is settling. Not for a bad life, not for an unhappy life, but for a safe life. I wonder if we do our children any favors by teaching them that security matters more than passion, that propriety matters more than authenticity. I wonder what kind of world we would have if we raised them to be brave instead of appropriate. Eleanor had understood, had seen the trap her own family represented, and she'd left this record, this testament to different values, perhaps hoping someone would find it and make different choices. Claire made her decision. She called Christopher and asked him to meet her, not at the estate but at a coffee shop in downtown Ridgefield, neutral ground. He arrived early, nervous, carrying a folder that he set on the table between them. I had our family lawyers draw this up, he said, a retroactive accounting of what you should have inherited when Dad died. It's not perfect. There's no way to calculate what you lost by not having access to family resources, education, connections, but it's a start, if you want it. Claire looked at the folder without opening it. I don't want your money, she said. Christopher's face fell. I understand, but please, at least consider— I want something else, Claire interrupted. My mother spent 42 years documenting my life in letters your family never saw. I want to do something that would have mattered to her, something that would honor what she built from nothing. She pulled out a proposal she'd been working on for 2 weeks, detailed, researched, thought through with the same careful precision her mother had brought to every stitch she'd sewn. There are hundreds of families in Ridgefield living the way my mother and I lived, working multiple jobs, one emergency away from catastrophe, raising kids who are brilliant and capable but won't get the chances they deserve because they don't have connections or money. I want to start a foundation in my mother's name, full scholarships for kids from working-class families, healthcare assistance, interest-free loans for emergencies, everything she would have used if she'd been willing to accept charity. Claire looked up at Christopher, at this half-brother who was still essentially a stranger. I want the Ashford family to fund it, generously, permanently, with no strings attached and no family name on it, just Margaret Morrison's name. Just the acknowledgement that she mattered, that what she did mattered, that the life she built raising me alone was worth celebrating. Christopher's eyes were wet. Yes, absolutely yes, whatever you need. And I want you and Elizabeth to serve on the board with me. Not as silent donors, but as active participants. I want you to meet the families we help. I want you to understand what it's like to live without the cushion you've always had. I want you to learn what your sister learned. That dignity isn't about how much money you have. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. Done, Christopher said immediately. Whatever you want, Claire. Whatever helps make this right. Claire knew it would never be truly right. Nothing could give her back the father who'd chosen not to know her, the childhood that should have been easier, the mother who'd worked herself to death because she'd been too proud to accept help from people who'd rejected her. But this felt like something, like a beginning. There's one more thing, she said. I want my mother's letters published, every one of them. I want people to read what she wrote, to see how she documented my life with such love and determination. I want her words to matter. She paused, then added, and I want your father's confession letter published alongside them. I want people to see both sides, the mother who fought in silence and the father who was too weak to fight at all. Christopher flinched but nodded. It's going to damage the family reputation. Good, Claire said. Maybe it should. You're right, he agreed quietly. Maybe it should. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Christopher asked the question Claire had been expecting. Will you let us be family, eventually? Not now, I understand you need time, but someday. Claire thought about her mother's letters, about the life Margaret had built from stubbornness and love. She thought about Eleanor Ashford's journal, about choosing bravery over appropriateness. She thought about the families she could help, the kids who would get chances they wouldn't have had otherwise, all in her mother's name. Maybe, she said, if you prove you mean it, if the foundation actually helps people, if you show up and do the work and treat the families we serve with the respect my mother deserved and never got, maybe then we can talk about being family. Christopher's smile was tentative but genuine. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. Claire left the coffee shop and drove to the cemetery, to her mother's grave. She brought the journal Eleanor had left, and her mother's letters, and sat in the grass as the autumn sun filtered through the trees. You were right about everything, she said to the freshly turned earth. You were right to protect me, right to refuse their money, right to document my life in those letters so I'd know I mattered to you. You were right and they were wrong, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. She opened Eleanor's journal to a page she'd marked, a passage that felt like it had been written for this moment. Legacy isn't about the money we leave behind. It's about the lives we touch, the love we give, the courage we model for those who come after us. The richest person isn't the one who dies with the most possessions. It's the one who dies knowing they lived according to their own values, that they treated people with dignity, that they chose love over fear every single time. Margaret Morrison had died in a trailer park with $800 in her savings account, but she'd lived rich in all the ways that actually mattered, and now, finally, the world would know it. Claire pulled out her phone and called the local newspaper, the one that had covered Ashford family events for 3 generations. She had a story to tell them, about a seamstress who'd loved a wealthy man's son, about a child raised in dignity despite poverty, about letters written and never sent, about secrets kept and truths revealed. She had her mother's words to share with the world. And she had work to do, a foundation to build, families to help, a legacy to create that would honor the woman who'd given her everything. The Margaret Morrison Foundation would open its doors in 6 months, funded by Ashford money, but bearing only her mother's name. And every scholarship awarded, every medical bill paid, every family helped, would be a testament to a woman who'd chosen love over bitterness, dignity over comfort, her daughter's future over her own present. Claire stood and placed her hand on her mother's headstone. They thought silence would erase us, she said softly, but you made sure we'd be remembered. You made sure I'd know the truth. And now I'm going to make sure everyone else knows it too. She walked back to her car as the sun set over Ridgefield, carrying her mother's letters and her grandmother Eleanor's journal, carrying the weight of 2 women's wisdom and the responsibility of living up to their courage. Some families are born into us, others we choose, and the strongest ones, the ones that actually matter, are built on truth, even when that truth is painful, especially when that truth is painful. Claire Morrison was the daughter of a billionaire who'd never claimed her, and a seamstress who'd claimed her with every breath. She knew which legacy actually mattered. She knew which parent had actually loved her. And she was going to spend the rest of her life proving that Margaret Morrison's love was worth more than all the Ashford money combined. If this story moved you, consider the people in your life who've loved you without conditions, who've sacrificed without resentment, who've built something from nothing so you could have more than they did. Honor them, remember them, tell their stories. Because the Margaret Morrisons of the world, the ones who choose dignity over ease, love over bitterness, truth over comfort, they're the ones who actually change lives. Subscribe to hear more stories about the strength hidden in silence, the power of love that asks for nothing in return, and the families we build when the ones we're born into fail us.